If you are just joining us here on the half hour of Open Line, first of all, thank you. We are talking about the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Dr. Thomas Schwartz from Vanderbilt University is joining us tonight to answer your questions about what is happening in this war. A professor of history and political science and European studies. And we have Tom on the line that would like to chime in. Tom, thanks for being with us.
Hello. I have a hypothetical question.
Okay.
Say Putin says, launch nuclear weapons. Ukraine, Poland, a NATO nation, he says, do it. Do you think those closest to him would say, we're not going to do it, and assassinate Putin? Thank you very much.
Ooh, that's a loaded one.
That's a loaded one, yes. Oh boy. I think there might be, before they'd assassinate him, there might be a sort of deep reluctance to do so. There might be the tendency to try to tell the leader, well, we don't need nuclear weapons, we could do something else. The nuclear taboo is a very strong one. I mean, the weapons have not been used since we used them to end World War II. Russian leaders, even in the period of the tense time behind the Cuban Missile Crisis, showed an understanding of how incredibly destructive they are. It's a good hypothetical. It's a terrifying hypothetical, right. Because in any sort of dictatorial leadership, subordinates are really reluctant, even in a case where they could see how awful things would happen, to contradict a leader, unless they feel they have allies or something with them that will save them. I mean, it can be suicidal to refuse to do what a leader says. So I would hope that there would be Russian military commanders who would just say, no, we can't do that. That's a hypothetical. Yes. That's scary enough.
It is. Let's go to Max. Max, good evening, and thank you for being with us. Max, go ahead and listen to your telephone. You got to turn down that TV for me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. The question I have, I used to play chess when I was in the Navy, when we were sailing off the coast of Vietnam, and I look at this as a chess game. It's Putin and his allies against the countries of the world. And what happens, in my view, is they're playing all these scenarios, because when you look at the chess game, you're always trying to figure out what's your next move, what's your next move. And all of a sudden, you're going along and you've been playing for hours, and all of a sudden, somebody makes the wrong move, and bang, the game blows up, and somebody else wins that you didn't think was going to win, or that you didn't think was going to be in it anymore. So that's my question, and I want to know how you feel about this.
All right, thank you, Max, and thank you for your... Go ahead.
Technical error is what I'm talking about in this game that blows everything up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Max. Thank you for your service as well. I think a chess game is very much what it feels like.
It does, although, after a certain point, I think there was, at the beginning, it seemed like Putin was deploying moves, for example,
yes.
Trying to get independence for the eastern separatist regions that he had, or things like that he seemed to be maneuvering. But once the invasion took place, it feels less like a chess game than the sort of overwhelming sort of attack without a particular, because they're coming at all different directions and all of that. It's certainly possible that there could be a miscalculation on someone's part. For example, the missile that hit near the Polish border were to hit a NATO territory, it would call into question, well, will NATO retaliate? Is it possible that the Russians will miscalculate and hit something in Poland and then precipitate an intervention by NATO into the country? So that's certainly there, certainly a possibility that there'll be a miscalculation on somebody's part. I would think it more likely on Putin's in terms of his gambling, his willingness to gamble on this. But I do think that it's possible that you could have a miscalculation that would blow everything up, would create a real, an escalated war.
Joe is also holding and so patient for us tonight. Joe, thank you. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, I've been following politics for a long time, and it seems like every time there's a conflict like this, that, there's an attack on freedom and democracy's at stake. But I was wondering, a lot of times we find out years later that there are other things going on, and I wonder if the Nord Stream pipeline that Russia wanted to put through to Germany is a part of the calculus for why the U.S. is so much supporting the Ukrainians in this conflict. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Joe.
Well, that's more complicated because I think the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, in a way, was a way for Putin to avoid or have a direct, or to make Germany more dependent on Russian energy supplies. So the United States, particularly President Trump, although President Obama had concerns as well, really pressured or wanted the Germans to not go ahead with it. President Biden came in and relieved the sanctions on the Nord Stream pipeline, said it was okay to go ahead. And then this invasion, Putin's invasion, has now led to it being shut down again. I think the pipeline itself was an indication that Putin was trying to, in a way, weaken the West by dividing it, by getting Germany to be much more pro-Russian and dependent on Russia than the United States. But in a way, he miscalculated, because then by undertaking the invasion, he's pushed the Germans back into the arms of the United States and other NATO countries in a way that they had been very reluctant to be. So to the extent the Nord Stream pipelines really have played a role, it's played a role against what Putin would have wanted.
Let's talk about sanctions a little bit. We had a professor on a couple of weeks ago who said generally sanctions have not had a big impact in times of war or on countries and other situations. He said, but because Russia's economy is fragile, it could have a bigger impact. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure. We've used sanctions in the past. Sanctions work best when you're dealing with a democratic or accountable society, or at least one which has aspects of democracy, so that the people being hurt most by the sanctions, the ordinary people, can express that in their votes or in their demonstrations and the rest. We've used sanctions against North Korea, we use sanctions against Iraq, we've used sanctions against Iran. These countries can resist. Russians, there is a sort of a national character of being able to be resistant to outside pressures and to foreign countries trying to tell you what to do. So even though these are tough sanctions that are hitting ordinary Russians, making it hard, making their money much less valuable, making it hard for them to travel, making it difficult for them to buy foreign goods of any sort, and creating all sorts of hardships, I think they're probably willing to endure that, especially because there will be sanctions breakers. Even today we heard that India might buy some of Russia's oil at a cut rate price, but still. There are countries, and sanctions can be broken. Sanctions also require strong will to maintain for a long period of time, and there are always ways out, and there are people willing to, or countries willing to take advantage of that. So I'm not so sure that the sanctions are as key as, if I had to calculate, I'd say the real surprise for Putin wasn't the sanctions and the difficulty, it was the Ukrainian resistance. I think he did not expect that level of resistance, and that has been the real thing that he miscalculated on.
Says a lot for Ukrainians.
Yeah.
All right, we also have Taylor on the line. Hi, Taylor. Good evening.
Good evening, and good evening to the professor. Enjoy what he has to say here. I was not going to mention sanctions, but I will since you just talked about that. I don't think there's ever been sanctions as strict and as deep as these are. But the problem is the number of people that are going to die in Ukraine before the people of Russia, of course, will start feeling it immediately. The oligarchs are taking their dozen passports and fleeing to all kinds of different countries with their large, monstrous jets. So I think although the oligarchs put Putin in office, and he put them in office, and I think at this point, though, that they are probably don't have the influence around the conference table that they or that people think, although I'm sure they have plenty of influence. But the main thing is enough dead soldiers. If this keeps going on, the Russian people are finally going to find out that what they're seeing on TV, state TV, is the only news they're getting, and it's preposterous. And if I might add, China state TV is running about the same kind of news information that Russia is. They've indicated on several occasions that the president of Ukraine has already fled the country, and all these kind of things. But Russia has got vehicles with rotten tires in this war. So discombobulated among their forces. I don't think they're the threat that the Americans and especially the Germans. The Germans are beginning to help out, and they should, because they're a big part of the pipeline that's feeding them 80% of their fuel, and feeding Italy, which we never hear about, almost 100% of their fuel. So
Taylor,
with that, I'll see what the professor has to say. Thank you.
Thank you. You bring up so many good points, and I wanted to get into this oligarch conversation. It is something that I think is bewildering to a lot of people. It's not something that we use a lot, a term, but obviously it is part of Russia. Give us a little education on oligarchs.
Well, oligarchs, when the Soviet Union collapsed, various Russians obtained parts of the formerly state-run economic facilities and aggrandized themselves extraordinarily. And this group didn't like the disorder of the Yeltsin years in the 90s, and essentially they were happy to see a figure like Putin come into power, who restored a certain degree of order and stability in Russia. But at the same time as he did that, he also cemented his own power. So while they are, certainly powerful figures within Russia, true power lies within Putin and the governing apparatus. And so while they have influence or had influence, in the end, this was a decision taken by the government and by Putin, not by the oligarchs themselves. And that's been seen, I think, clearly in the way in which a number of them have either left Russia or tried to escape the sanctions and this sort of thing. They had a lot of money, and their money gave them a certain influence, but it didn't give them necessarily the political power to take on Putin.
Taylor also brought up the Russian people and how they will perceive this war and really what they know about it at this point because of state TV there, not telling the true story. But we do know that with companies pulling out, like Visa and MasterCard, even McDonald's, it is ushering in a Soviet era, something that looks a lot like that. What do you think is the impact of those moves?
It's going to have some impact. The problem is, again, the ability of the Russian people, as courageous as some of them are who have protested, is still limited by a harsh repression and the consequences of taking actions that could get you in jail. People are not. It's hard to be courageous when you've got a family or when you've got other concerns like that, and this is something that is certainly going to that people will endure They're being told that the mission of their troops is to liberate Ukraine from Nazis and all of this. And, you know, they may choose to believe some of it, at least unless they have sources of information. They're certainly aware that countries of the world have been hard on Russia, but then there is a feeling among many Russians that the West doesn't understand them and has always been against them. And so that could be played too. So in the long term, this could have a real impact if it continues on and hardships grow and this sort of thing. But in the short term, I think one of the things that he suggested is a lot of Ukrainians are going to die in the short term, and this is one of the problems of sanctions and other men's non-military means of ending a conflict is a lot of people die in the meantime before any sort of pressures come to really work.
All right, I do believe it's Lola on the phone. Did I get that right? Is it Lola?
Yes, it is.
Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My thing is that when this war first started, before it first started, it was talking about what Ukraine was to millions of people, how they fed people, et cetera, how they were doing all of these things that supplement other countries and the people within it. I kind of have a two-part question. My first question is, can you kind of explain to me exactly what it was Ukraine was doing as far as that was concerned, as far as helping to supplement other countries or feed other countries, etc. And two, our American military is known to be one of the strongest militaries in the world. And right now, it feels like the war could have been over if we had just went on in, and I know you don't do this all the time, but if we had just gone on in and just wiped all of these people out, even though they're saying that they got their military weapons from us and all this other kind of stuff, that's neither here nor there. But if there is going to be a concern as to America not having the freedom to be able to stay in the position that they're in, then why not go in and just wipe Russia and Putin out, including the Chinese? Because they have always threatened us. We've never threatened them, but they have always threatened us. And I'm an American who's about tired of being threatened by someone as puny as Putin is, and whatever that. Not the guy in Ho Chi Minh. I'm way back in Vietnam, so that lets you know how old I am. But whoever this other person is, I'm tired of them, putting out threats to us that they have no business putting threats out to. So let's go in there and slap the crap out of both of them, and then get rid of them like we did Saddam Hussein or whoever else we've gotten rid of.
All right, Lola, great questions. I tell you what I'm going to do. I have to take a quick break, but when we come back, we will answer those questions, so stay right where you are.